Shalom, everybody. Really, really great to be here. Akiva here from Israel. So again, really, really great to be here. Great to be partnering with Shamayim and their incredible work and dedication to this very, very important topic and field and movement. There's so much work to be done, and Shamayim is doing a lot of it. And we all have our part to do in this growing movement, in this growing cause, in order to really alleviate many of the problems that are happening in our modern day world, and alleviate a lot of the pain and suffering that are happening towards the animals because of human choices. Okay, so we're in a very special time right now. As Rabbi Shmuley said at the very beginning, we're in the 9 days right now. We're just a few days away from Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, which is a very intense day in the Jewish calendar, to say the least. Right. So let's just build a little bit of context for Tisha B'Av, and then we'll move from there towards this topic of mourning for the animals. Right, and how we connect animal welfare to this day that's coming up in just a few days. All right, so just let's go a little historical for a moment. You know, what is Tisha B'Av? All right, what is this day, the 9th of Av? This day that's known as the saddest day in the Jewish calendar, this day of mourning, this day of fasting, this really, really intense day. We really don't have a day quite like this day specifically in the Jewish calendar. And you know, typically when we think about the 9th of Av, when we think about Tisha B'Av, we think about the destruction of the first and the second temple in Jerusalem, rightfully so. And we'll talk about that in a moment, but it goes back even further than that. Right? It goes back to a biblical story of when the Israelites were traveling through the desert, right? They left Egypt, right? They're on their way to the promised land. They're on their way to the homeland, and there's this decision that's made to send in spies to check out the land to see what is it going to be like in this land. And it's the whole story where they send a representative from each tribe. 12 leaders of the Israelites go into the land. They spy out the land. They come back 40 days later, and they come back with this report that really scares the nation. It really instills fear into the nation, so much so that the nation believes that we can't do it. Not only like can we not do it, we shouldn't even try. And it's really this intense breaking point for the nation, where they express this great fear and they express this great lack of faith in their ability, and also God's ability to bring them into the promised land, into the land of Israel in a safe way, in a protected way, in a successful way. So already this day is connected to a brokenness, and on this level, like an inner brokenness, all right, that they don't believe in themselves. Right? They don't believe in their abilities. I mean, God promised them. God told them that we're gonna be able to do this, and they still were unable to find that inner faith and that inner belief in order to go forward. All right, and so we learn from the direct story of the Torah that they were punished for this. And they were punished with the 40 years of wandering around the desert. Those 40 years were not meant to be. They were not the ideal situation. That wasn't the original plan. 1 year for each day that the spies were in the land, and this day already becomes a magnet for intense experiences and intense happenings. And we know that throughout Jewish history, this day, the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av, right, will attract, so to speak, some of the greatest tragedies of all of Jewish history. All right. We know that the first temple was destroyed on the 9th of Av. Okay, and we know that the first temple was destroyed by the Babylonians. According to Jewish tradition, the reason the temple was destroyed was because the Israelites, Bnei Israel, the Jewish people, you know, went against the 3 cardinal sins of the Jewish tradition, right? That being idol worship, adultery, and murder. Right, and you can have a whole class just on that. But if we look at those 3 sins, what's at the root of those 3 sins? On some level, I'm just going to say really simply, because I don't want to dwell or delve too deeply into it, but we can say that it's a real kind of, focus on oneself, taking care of oneself, what I want to do, what I want to get out of this world, right? The focus on the me more than the we. Okay, I think those three cardinal sins have that as a root: the idol worship, the murder, and the adultery. Taking care of myself, satisfying myself, my own desires, even my own lusts. Okay, that's the first temple. The second temple is destroyed hundreds and hundreds of years later on the same exact day, according to the Jewish tradition. And the sages teach us that the second temple was destroyed because of sinat chinam, because of baseless hatred between Jews. There are all these splintering factions between the Jews. It sounds a little bit like today, I know, right? All these different factions, all these different deot, all these different opinions, all these different approaches, all these different understandings of what Judaism should be and how Judaism should be lived, and which is fine. Judaism has space for that, can hold space for that, but the Jews didn't know how to do that, and they fought. They fought intensely, to a point where they were literally murdering each other, literally, right? And as a result, the sages say that the spiritual reason behind the destruction of the second temple was this hate, was this baseless hatred between the Jewish people. And so you think about sinat chinam, right? It's all about me. It's what I believe, and what I think should be. So we really see this theme in Tisha B'Av, really strongly of this focus on the self and the taking care of the self, as opposed to taking care of somebody else, right? Of taking care of the other. Okay, and so this really, sets the scene, so to speak, for this day, the 9th of Av. Right? There are other tragedies that befell the Jewish people in and around this date. One of the most well-known and horrific ones was the beginning of the liquidation of the Warsaw Ghetto during the Holocaust, right, in 1942. Again, a whole nother story into itself, but just wanted to mention that, right, that this day really did become a magnet for so much tragedy and so much pain for the Jewish people. Right, so I want to say, right off the bat, I mean, we have enough to mourn on this day. Right? There's so much to mourn for on Tisha B'Av. So much Jewish blood was spilled. So many Jewish tears were shed. Right? And when I'll be honest with you, I'm going to be, upfront. When I, advertised this class and the title, Mourning for Animals, connecting it to Tisha B'Av and the 9 days, I got some negative pushback from people. What are you doing? What kind of connection are you making? Like, that's ridiculous. Like, mourning for the animals and Tisha B'Av. Like, why are you making stuff up? Right? Why are you bringing in things to the day of Tisha B'Av that don't belong there, that were never there before? Right? And I hope to answer that question during this class. I think it's a great question, right? I have an answer for it. I already had an answer before those people asked me. Okay, but I bring it up now because there is so much already in Tisha B'Av. You can spend the whole day thinking about the first and the second temple, right? The destruction of Jerusalem, the tragedies that have befallen the Jewish people on this day, in and around this day. Okay, without even thinking about the animals. But I think thinking about the animals on Tisha B'Av, one, makes so much sense and really fits into the deepest, or a very deep understanding of what Tisha B'Av is all about. Right? Because I'll be straight up, Tisha B'Av is not just about Jerusalem. Okay, that might sound, I don't know, heretical to some people. Okay, but on some level, I think I can say it's not only about Jerusalem, and on another level, it's all about Jerusalem, and that's why mourning for animals on Tisha B'Av makes perfect sense. Okay, I will hopefully make that very clear in the very, very near future as I share more. Okay, so Tisha B'Av is the day of sadness, right? We say it's the saddest day of the year. It's a day of mourning. Okay, Tisha B'Av is a day of intense mourning. Okay, if I can just get another thumbs up to make sure I'm okay with everybody and people can hear me and see me, and if it's choppy, I apologize. Okay, we're relying on incredible technology right now, thousands of miles worth of all kinds of infrastructure. So good. So really at the root of Tisha B'Av is is mourning brokenness. Okay. Yes, on one level, it's this historical connection. Whoa, what happened to us in the past? Let's take a day out of our year. Literally, that's what we're doing. We're taking an entire day out of our year to focus on the really intense things, the horrible things that have happened to the Jewish people. And that makes total sense. I really think it's like it was a wise decision on part of our sages to declare such a day, to declare a day of mourning and a day of fasting, so that we really don't vary here and there throughout the year, but to take an entire day and say, I'm going to spend this day as much as I possibly can and think about and contemplate what has happened to my people, right? Simply for just trying to be who we are in this world, that in and of itself is an unbelievable thing, right? But I do believe that if we really want to get to the heart of Tisha B'Av, and we really want to honor this day and to connect to this day in the deepest way possible, right? I think we need to go beyond the top layer or layers, okay? Because again, we're mourning Jerusalem, we're mourning the destruction of the temple, we're mourning, all that was, in the past and no longer is today. But Judaism is not about crying over the past. Right? There's a whole story, of someone comes up to Rabbi and says, like, why are you crying over the past? You can't fix the past. There's a phrase in Aramaic that says, ma dahave have, masha haya haya. Like, what was. Like, why are you spending a whole day mourning and crying over something in the past? You can't change the past. Wouldn't it be more worthwhile using your energy and focusing on what's happening in the here and the now? And the answer is yes, actually. And that is more of the essence of Tisha B'Av. All right, I want to pause that, hold that thought for a second, and just kind of bring in this other thought and weave it in, that the destruction of Jerusalem was not just a one-time historical event. All right, for Judaism and the Jewish people, Jerusalem is the connector between heaven and earth. It's the connector between the physical and the spiritual. It's this conduit that brings shefa and baracha, right? Abundance and blessing to the world, right? And it's not to say that we're living in a world that's completely devoid of those things, but with Jerusalem destroyed, according to Jewish thought and belief, the world is not and cannot fully realize its potential. We can do amazing things. We can start initiatives, organizations, businesses, really do great stuff. But when we look at the world as a whole, with Jerusalem still broken, with Jerusalem still missing on some level, right? With Jerusalem still not whole, there's a lacking in the world that we're not even aware of, because we don't even know what it means to have a complete and whole and full Jerusalem in the world, right? I remember once, I just have to share this story with you just really quickly. A bunch of years ago, I was I believe I was in Jerusalem, actually. Yeah, I was in Jerusalem, and I was with a group of students, and we had Shabbat, and my students had mostly gone back to their rooms, and I stayed behind to do Birkat Hamazon, right, the blessing after the meal with bread, right? And I was singing it out loud. It was Shabbat. I was in the mood, so I was like singing it, and I get to the phrase "Uvenei Yerushalayim Kodesh b'mheira b'yameinu," right? And let the holy city of Jerusalem be rebuilt speedily in our days. And there were a bunch of workers who were still around, kind of cleaning up the place, and at least half, if not more, were Arabs, right, from East Jerusalem, and they understand Hebrew, right? And I was just thinking to myself, here we're in Jerusalem at this like nice hotel, 20-minute walk from the hotel, and I hear this Jew, basically screaming out loud, "And let Jerusalem be rebuilt speedily in our days." And I'm thinking, no, I didn't ask them, but I was thinking they might be thinking, what's this guy talking about? Jerusalem is rebuilt. Go outside and see it. It's this gorgeous city. It's got almost 1 million people living in it, buildings and roads and shopping centers and hotels. And I was thinking, of course, that, yeah, Jerusalem is really beautiful today and it's bigger than it's ever been before, but it's still spiritually not there. Right? The spiritual aspect of Jerusalem is not yet full and it's not yet complete. And without that aspect, which is represented by the temple, right, according to Jewish thought, the Beit HaMikdash, so Jerusalem is not complete, and we're still praying for its rebuilding, right, on the spiritual level. The physical of what's happening now is almost like the preparation for the spiritual. So I just want to add in that piece, right, to show or to share that, again, according to Jewish thought, a world without Jerusalem is not a full world. That Jerusalem is this conduit between heaven and earth, between the spiritual and the physical, and allows us to connect those two in unbelievable and powerful ways. And really, and I'm not sure how this is going to sound to everybody, but on some level, with a broken Jerusalem, really, if you go down to like the deeper mystical teachings in Judaism, it'll say that the fact that Jerusalem is still broken, that has really opened up the doors for all kinds of brokenness in the world. And I'll go in the reverse order, that all the brokenness that there is in the world can be traced back somehow to the fact that Jerusalem is still broken. All right, so I wanted to make that connection because I think it's really important to make that connection in order to understand really what Tisha B'Av is and what we could be doing on Tisha B'Av, and I think even say should be doing, okay? And if so, going off of that thought, right, if that means that a broken Jerusalem has kind of opened up the doors for all kinds of brokenness in the world, then when we look around our world, and we open up our eyes and we open up our hearts and we see the brokenness of our world, right? Even if we don't know how to trace it back to Jerusalem, even the knowing that actually somehow traces back to a broken Jerusalem, that's really powerful in general, but specifically for Tisha B'Av, which means that on Tisha B'Av, we are not just mourning the brokenness of the past. In fact, we're not really mourning the brokenness of the past at all. We're really mourning the brokenness of the now, of the here and the now. Okay? I want to say that again. On Tisha B'Av, we're really mourning the brokenness of our world today, of the here and the now, all the different kinds of brokenness. We have a beautiful world. We live in a beautiful world. We should celebrate that. We should see that. We should recognize that. Right? But at the same time, we can't hide from the fact that there is a lot of brokenness. Right? And we don't have the time right now to even, list all the different kinds of brokenness. But I'm sure we're well aware of many of those types of brokenness. Right? So really, that's them. Right? The real heart, the essential idea of Tisha B'Av is not crying over what happened yesterday or 2,000 years ago. It's not crying over plant-based milk. Okay, it's crying over the brokenness of our world today, and realizing that the brokenness that existed 2,000 years ago is still existing in our world today, and that's why we still have Tisha B'Av. Because if there wasn't that brokenness anymore, we wouldn't have Tisha B'Av anymore. There would be no reason for it. Because again, it's not just for the past, right? It is here for the here and now. And when we open up that door, that important door to looking at our generation and its brokenness and mourning that brokenness on Tisha B'Av, of course, we open up the door to mourning for the animals and what's going on for the animals in our times, in our generation, right? And the pain and the suffering that humans are causing animals every single day, day after day. Because of what? Because of our food choices, because of what we want to put into our mouths, because of a certain kind of taste that we want on our tongues for a few fleeting moments. That's what it boils down to, right? People have a desire, we can even call it a lust, and Judaism actually does link lust with eating animals, okay, very directly. And because of that desire, because of that lust, and because of that fulfillment of that desire and that lust, humans are causing untold pain and suffering every single day to these animals for their entire lives, from the moment that they're born to the moment that they are killed. And it's been said before, and I'll say it again, it's been said by many people before, that today, the greatest moment of an animal's life who is living in a factory farm is the day that they're killed. That's the best day of their life, that the suffering is finally over. I'm sure you guys have seen pictures and videos. It's all over, everywhere today. It's hard not to see it anymore. And if we're mourning the brokenness of our world, for me, it's a chovah. It's an obligation for us to include in our thoughts, in our focus, in our prayers, and in our honoring of Tisha B'Av. But basically, where we were is basically speaking about the inclusion, right? The inclusion of the animals in our commemoration of Tisha B'Av, right? And recognizing that if Tisha B'Av is really about focusing on the brokenness of our world and mourning that brokenness, crying even over that brokenness, right? Then how can we not include the pain and the suffering of the animals? I did just really quick research just the other day, and I wanted to see how many human beings have been killed over the past decade as a result of various conflicts throughout our world. The number that I saw on a couple of different websites was 1 million. Over the past decade, right now, I'm not talking about disease or famine, I'm talking about war, basically. I'm talking about war and conflicts between nations. About 1 million people have been killed, according to the websites that I looked at. I don't know if you know this number, but worldwide, about 80 billion land animals are killed for food. That's in 1 year, 80 billion. Okay? And I'm not here to compare humans to animals. I'm not here to get into that conversation. But I think it is a really powerful number that when we look at the last 10 years, about 1 million human souls have been killed in armed conflicts between peoples and nations, which is heartbreaking, which is 1 million too many, obviously. But that number, when we look at the number of animals that have been killed just because humans want to eat animals, in the last 10 years, we're talking about 700 to 800 billion land animals. That's shocking. And we know, you and I know, that most of those animals were raised in horrific conditions, right? In factory farms, where the second they were born into the world, they were trapped and they were enclosed in tight conditions, dirty, disgusting conditions. I mean, conditions no pet owner would ever want their pet to live in, ever. I mean, I don't know if anyone follows me on social media, but every now and then I talk about my 6-year-old son because we like to take Corona got us into this get in the car and go for a drive and go on walks kind of habit, which has actually been really, really great. And even as Corona has, dissipated, we've been keeping that up. And here in Israel, to Israel's credit, it might sound like a funny thing to say, but to Israel's credit, you don't have to drive too far to see a chicken coop or a cow shed, right? It's not as hidden as in places, let's say in America. I know where I grew up in America, I'd have to drive 100 miles to see anything like that. And I never saw it growing up. In Israel, you see it almost all the time, right? Chicken coops and cow sheds. Anytime you visit a kibbutz, anywhere you're around the kibbutz, just they're all over. Literally in a 5-minute radius from where I live, I can see thousands and thousands of chickens and cows in these places. So I've passed many of these with my son, and I've stopped and I've talked about it with him. And just literally just yesterday or today, I think it was yesterday, we were in the car just talking, and he shared with me, he said, Abba, until you brought, and he brought this up on his own, it's really interesting.
he said, until you brought me to these places, I always thought that the animals lived really nice lives. I thought they just, had a lot of space and they had a nice life. And then people, I don't even think he realized they got killed at the end of the process, but at the very least, he thought that they lived nice lives, right? And he said, only when you took me, to see the cows and to see the chickens, and I realized, wow, they live such horrible lives. I'm like, literally, this is what my 6-year-old said to me just yesterday, right? So we know, right? We know the unbelievable pain and suffering that animals are living every single moment of their lives, all the horrors of the meat industry and the dairy industry and the egg industry. I mean, I've talked to many people, and I am not here at all, right, to judge anybody or to question anybody how they eat, what they eat, what kind of food plan they follow. But I think it's at the very least interesting to note that, I mean, even I'll say for me, I'm vegan over 25 years, and it took me many years to realize that in the egg industry, all male chicks are killed basically the day that they're born. I had already made a decision not to eat eggs, but I didn't even know about that horrific aspect of it, right? Male chicks are killed on the day of their birth because the egg industry can't use them because males don't make eggs and they can't be, switched over to the poultry because it's a different kind of breed. Okay, so let's move it back into Tisha B'Av and start to close. And if anybody has any thoughts, comments, or questions. Tisha B'Av, on some level, is the saddest day of the Jewish year, right? It's this heartbreak of a day. It's this painful day. It's this hard day. It's a fast day. I mean, that in and of itself. And then, like, through the fasting and above the fasting, we're supposed to think about all these really important things. But, and this is very Jewish, Tisha B'Av is actually in the Tanakh, in the book of Eicha, in the book of Lamentations, it's called the Moed, which translates as festival. Just raise your hand quickly if you ever heard that before. That Tisha B'Av, the saddest day of the year, is called a festival. Okay, a lot of people don't know that. How can you call Tisha B'Av a festival? A Moed. I mean, that's Moedim the Simcha. That's what we call our other holidays, right? A Tisha B'Av, how can we call that a festival? And this is, again, just so absolutely perfectly Jewish, right? We learn, according to Jewish tradition, that on the saddest day of the year, on the darkest day of the year, on the hardest day of the year, on the hardest fast day of the year, really, because even though it's as long as Yom Kippur, it ends much later, at least for those of us in the Northern Hemisphere, and it feels like the hardest, right? It's actually a festival because we learn, according to Jewish tradition, that the Mashiach, or at least the light of Mashiach, of the Messiah, is born on this day. That the seed of redemption, the seed of Ku'ulah, the seed of a perfected world, the seed of a better world, is born on Tisha B'Av, right? Because when you hit that bottom, right, there's nowhere to go but up. When you hit the darkness, part of the night, the dawn is right around the corner. Right? There's this incredible teaching in the Midrash that says that in the temple, specifically the first temple, they had the Ark of the Covenant, which was like this wooden ark covered by gold, and inside were the 10 Commandments. And it was in the Holy of the Holies, a place that only the high priest went in once a year on Yom Kippur. Now, on top of the ark were these golden kind of winged beings, Huvim, they're called, cherubim. And the Midrash says that when the Jewish people were doing the will of God, so they were facing each other and facing each other, right? And when the Jewish people were not doing the will of God, they were facing away from each other. Like this miracle happened with this, with these two winged angelic beings on top of this ark. There's a teaching that says that when the temple was destroyed, when the first temple was destroyed, this Ark of the Covenant was brought out, and these winged angelic beings on top of the ark were not only not facing each other, They were embracing each other. They were like hugging each other, which doesn't make any sense at all, because we said before the first temple was destroyed because the Israelites, the Jewish people, were messing up left and right. So how can you say that these winged beings were embracing each other at a time when the Jews are at the lowest of the low? Well, this is explained by many sages throughout Jewish history in the following way, because in that moment, the Jewish people realized, oh my God, we messed up. Oh my God, our actions led to this. Our actions led to this destruction. Our actions led to this brokenness. Right? The prophets were there all along the way trying to get us back on track, trying to warn us. We didn't heed their warnings, kind of like what's happening today with all of the scientists and leaders telling us about the consequences of our actions and what we're doing to the environment and how much we're messing up this planet. And nonetheless, so many people are still deciding to ignore these warnings, right? But again, in this moment, right, why were these winged beings embracing each other? Because in that moment, the Jewish people had a very, very intense moment of realization that we messed up, we brought about destruction, and now it's a time for fixing. If we have the power to destroy, believe that we have the power to fix. It's a famous teaching from Rabbi Nachman, an early Hasidic leader. Right? If you believe that you can destroy, believe that you can fix. That's the secret, and that's the secret of Tisha B'Av. Right? On Tisha B'Av, all this destruction, all of this mourning, all of this sadness. At the same time, it's called the Moed, it's called a festival. We actually, for those who know like some of Jewish prayer, we don't say Tachanun on Tisha B'Av, like this prayer of repentance, and like we beat our chests and we're sorry for all the bad things that we've done. We don't say that on Tisha B'Av because it's a holiday, and we don't say Tachanun, this prayer, on holidays. Right? It's a really, really wild concept, right? And basically, right, the seed of the future redemption is born on Tisha B'Av. So it's really, again, the kind of putting together all these pieces that we just spoke about. It's not only is it not about mourning over, things that happened in the past, essentially, when we get to the deeper levels of Tisha B'Av, right? But it is rather mourning about the brokenness that we are experiencing in our world today and being fully, fully aware, right, about it, of it, and contemplate it and fully take it in for an entire day. But on top of that, it's about realizing, right, that there is a power in this day that we can utilize to help bring out a better world, to help heal the brokenness, to fix the brokenness, right, to heal the world, to make the world a better place. So really, all of this is woven into Tisha B'Av, right, and the deepest Jewish idea of them all, which is Tikkun Olam. I have to say, I'm very transparent when I share, when I speak, and when I teach. It drives me nuts today when people say, oh, Tikkun Olam is like something made up by Reformed Jews, right? I don't know if you guys have heard that. Like they've replaced Judaism with Tikkun Olam. That's their new religion. That is such absurdness, right? Such I don't know, a misunderstanding of Judaism. I mean, thank God, Baruch Hashem, over the past few years, I've been getting into deeper and deeper texts of Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah, and you go into these deep, esoteric, ancient texts of our tradition, and what are they talking about? They're talking about that we are here to fix the world, that it's all about fixing the world. Every single thing we do and every single day that we live, we have an opportunity to fix the world. I mean, it is Judaism. Right, Reform Judaism is right. Judaism is all about Tikkun Olam. And again, on Tisha B'Av, we have this unbelievable moment, this unbelievable opportunity to tap into that in a really deep way by going through the pain and through the suffering, feeling that pain and feeling that suffering and being open to it, and feeling broken about the brokenness, so that we feel motivated to do something about it, right? To bring healing and fixing to the world. right? I'll say this as my last thing. I mean, as I think about this more and I share about this more and I teach about this more, it just becomes more and more apparent to me. I know there's so many problems in the world, right? There's so many things that need to be fixed, and there's so many organizations out there trying to fix all the different kinds of brokenness. And it's great to see these organizations and these people doing that work. It's so important. But I just feel like what we eat, the food choices we make, what we decide to buy and put in our shopping carts and put in our tables and put in our fridges and put in our mouths and put in our bodies has such an incredible impact on so many spheres of life in this world, on so many different aspects of modern day reality, right? From the environment to ecosystems, to the air, the soil, the water, right? Our own human health, and of course, the animals. The fact that we could just make a few changes in how we eat and alleviate tons and tons of destruction of nature, destruction of God's world, and alleviate the pain and the suffering that God's creatures are going through on a daily basis. I mean, that is so powerful. That is a lot of power in our hands. And I get it. Meat tastes good. I get it. I grew up as a kid. I didn't eat any vegetables. None. I ate white bread and lots of meat every single day, multiple times a day. I liked meat. I liked how it tasted. I liked how it smelled when it was being cooked. But when I was in college, when I was 18 years old, and I started to really realize what's going on behind the scenes, I said, I'm sorry, I can't do that anymore. I can't support that. Right? And yeah, we have such power in our hands. I really believe that that's what Tisha B'Av is really teaching us about. Because, and with this, I'm really, really kind of conclude. Whoever knows me as a teacher knows that I say last thing about 3 or 4 times. But I'll just say, Judaism is a happy religion. It's a happy tradition. It's a happy path. Of course, there's times we have to mourn, and there's times that we feel we need to cry. But Judaism couldn't let Tisha B'Av go as just as a day of mourning and crying. It had to help us to realize, because that's so Jewish and that's what Judaism is about, is that really all of this mourning and all of this crying and all of this sadness really is only a tool to bring us to greater happiness for us and for the entire world, for all of God's creation, right? To motivate us, to open up our eyes, to feel it in our heart, to feel the pain, not for the sake of feeling pain, but so that we feel motivated to alleviate that pain, alleviate the suffering, and fix the brokenness of our world. And the animals every single day are experiencing that. And it's in our hands alone, to stop that and to fix that. And that's why I feel completely proud, and I will say it out loud, that on Tisha B'Av, in addition to mourning over Jerusalem, in addition to mourning over all of the Jewish tragedies that have befallen our people, yes, I'm also mourning over what we are doing to the animals. I'm also mourning over what we are doing to nature, to ecosystems, to God's creation, because it's all interconnected. It's all connected. All of that brokenness of all different kinds in the past and today, it's all connected. And when we get to the root of that and we fix it from the root, we'll see that we will get to that day, that great, amazing day that Judaism has been talking about now for thousands of years. The day where there will be no more pain, there will be no more suffering, and there will be no more brokenness. Not for us humans, not for the animals, and not for the planet. So my friends, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your patience with some of my technical challenges. But I'm glad that we were able to get together and to share. And if anybody wants to share any thoughts, comments, or questions, I'm here and happy to engage. So thank you so much.
Great. Feel free to unmute yourself. Emma, is your hand up? Oh, no, okay. Oh, it's a clapping hand, sorry. Great. All right, who wants to jump in with a thought or question?
I'll jump in. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Laura
I can
Slid.
hear you, yes.
Okay. I live in Bartlett, New Hampshire. I grew up in West Hartford, Connecticut. I went to Hebrew school. I had a bas mitzvah. I didn't learn the words vegetarian or vegan until I was in my 40s. Now that is not a representation of well-rounded Jewish education. And so that's one of the things that I wanted to say. The more important thing I want to say is I do not feel at this juncture that it is over the top to not judge necessarily people for what they're eating, but certainly have discussions. You know, in your communities, you have rules and regulations so that everybody kind of can live in a community and nobody's bothering each other. Well, we have a small planet. It's the community. You know, you said before that you don't want to tell anybody what to eat. You're not judgmental, but there is a point, I believe, where we need to stop being apologetic and say to people, do you not understand that this system of agriculture is a death sentence for all the above? You know, my friend was an Orthodox Jew. She was a strict kosher Jewish woman to the letter of the law. I brought her a kosher birthday cake once. She made like 8 calls before she would take a bite of it. So, but she died of colon cancer. She died on that diet prescribed by the Orthodox Union. So all these things, I just don't think we should be apologetic about engaging people about this broken, failed system. And I mean, I'm just like, my heart is broken every day. Now I do vegan cooking classes. I bring vegan food to work. I write letters to the editor. I try to do what I can in my power to, you know, tikkun olam. Thank you for doing this. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Laura, so much for sharing that. Really, Matt, thank you so much. Look, I'll just quickly respond. If anybody else wants to respond as well, feel free. It seems sometimes like a tricky balance. You know, what do you say? How much do you say? When do you say? To who do you say? Right. So I'll be, my closest friends, none of them are vegan. One of them is vegetarian. Right. And my community of friends, they're like deep spiritual, seekers and learners and committed to spiritual growth. And every time I get together with them for whatever reason, and I sit around the table with them and they're, chomping down their chicken wings and their other, animals, I'm in shock. And yet I have felt that it's hard for me at that moment, to bring that up with him. But I will say this. And I think this is one of those things where each person has to find their way and their balance and what they're comfortable with and what they feel is, the right thing to do in the right time, whatever. It's really interesting, I went, kind of public, let's say, with Vegan Rabbi about 2 years ago. And obviously through that, I share a ton of teachings, about Judaism and animal welfare and veganism. And a friend of mine just said, like literally 2 weeks ago, he left me a message. We talk a lot on WhatsApp recordings, even though we live like 7 minutes away from each other. And he said one day, he said, Akiva, I just want you to know, I never told you, but your teachings on Vegan Rabbi, I see them, I follow them, are having a real big impact on me. And for the first time in my life, I'm reducing greatly the amount of meat I'm eating, and he said separately, 2 of my kids have gone vegan. Right. And it's just so interesting. I feel we can put out ideas, thoughts, messages in all kinds of ways, and it could affect people in all kinds of ways, even if we don't directly speak to them. Right. I shared this actually on a post some time back that I was at Shabbat Kiddush on Shabbat morning one day. And I went over to talk to a friend of mine because I haven't seen him in a while. And there happened to be a meat served at the Kiddush, and he had meat on his plate. and he literally like covered the meat with his hands, you know, like he's like, oh, I'm so sorry, you know. I'm like, why are you saying sorry to me? You know, like say sorry to the animals, you know. But it was just so interesting to see that reaction. And I feel like when we live our truth and we are our truth to the best of our abilities, I really believe we can have an impact in ways that maybe go beyond the one-on-one, you know, and the direct. Although I think there is definitely a place for that as well. Don't get me wrong. Please don't get me wrong. There is a time and a place for that as well. And each of us just needs to kind of, you know, figure it out for ourselves. So yeah, I just want to share that. But thank you, Laura, for bringing that up. I think it's a really important topic in this whole bigger conversation.
Can I say something?
Please.
Okay. I'm Gloria. I'm from Seattle. Whenever I'm davening the Shemona Esrei and hoping, you know, praying for the rebuilding of the temple, but the temple is for sacrifice, and I feel like I'm not being truthful to myself because I don't want that to happen. And I've talked to rabbis here who are meat eaters, whatever, and they say, well, who knows what's going to happen? You know, what's going to happen? But I have a dilemma. I have a real dilemma. I mean, right. I want, you know, I want things to be better, but yeah.
Right. That could be a whole nother class, you know, like praying for the rebuilding of the temple and korbanot as vegetarians and vegans. You know, what do we do with that?
Yeah.
Right. But 100%, I agree with, you know, those rabbis who said to you, you know, we don't know. I mean, time will tell. There are different opinions about that. I mean, there's a lot to say about that. I won't say too much right now, but I from time to time I share about korbanot, you know, the sacrifices on my post. But I'll just say this really, really briefly, that one, it's so important to know that first of all, there's a Rambam from the Guide for the Perplexed, where he talks about that the only reason that God even gave the Jewish people korbanot was because otherwise, if they didn't have it, that they would lust after the other nations, the polytheistic nations, and that they would go and stray after their ways and lose monotheism, because there was such a ta'ava, there was such a lust, literally, for worshiping idols back then and giving sacrifices. So God gave the Israelites a way to still give sacrifices, but in a very specific way, only one place, according to very, very specific laws. I mean, like half the Torah basically is talking about, sacrifices, right? And how you do it and with what you do it and all that. So, you know, according to that teaching from the Rambam, it wasn't ideal. It was a concession of sorts. In addition to that, you know, Rav Kook makes mention that in the future, at least in you know, eventually, that in a rebuilt third temple, there will not be animal sacrifices anymore. I mean, because we won't be eating animals won't even be eating animals. It'll be a whole different kind of world. And I'll just maybe share lastly, though there's so much more to share about this question. It's a really good question and a really big question. I remember going to someone's house for Shabbat dinner years ago, who had literally a living room view of the Kotel. Right, his living room had this huge window, and he looked out at the Kotel. He was really deeply immersed in the study of Kabbalah, and he had this whole idea and this whole theory that the third temple wouldn't even be made out of mortar or brick or stones; that it would be made out of like I don't know, like lasers or holographic lasers or something, like really something of a whole nother sort and level. The only reason I bring that up is because we don't know. We don't know what the third temple is going to be. We don't even know what it's going to really look like fully, obviously, until we get there. And I believe that there's very good reason to believe that we're not going to be sacrificing animals again. And what we did in the past, right, through our sacrificing of animals was very kind of contextual. It's very specific to that time period of our story. And we're so beyond that. And that if a third temple is representing heightened and enlightened consciousness, right? Well, we're going to take a sheep and slit its throat and throw it on an altar. I mean, it doesn't seem like those two really jive well together.
I hope not.
But I think the best answer we can give is time will tell. But there is reason to think that we will not be returning to korbanot like we had in the past.
Well, maybe we should think about changing Musaf then, because every Shabbos I sit in shul and Uviyom Viyom HaShabbat, and then we hear about all the animals that are killed. It's kind of a cognitive dissonance for me.
Mhm.
I hear you.
I know we have to conclude here, but I will say that I wrote an article just a few years ago on how, if we feel compelled to do so, can still say daven for korbanot, but have a very different intentionality behind what these korbanot, are about, and what we're davening for. But this, like Rabbi Akiva said, this is a whole different section we'll have to have together, and I would love to have it. I know I have a lot of thoughts on Bait Shalishi, and I'm sure many of you do as well. So thank you for encouraging us to do that. We wish everyone a meaningful 9 days and Tisha B'Av, where we can reduce suffering in the world, bring more light to conquer the darkness, and continue to spread love and justice and defend all sentient beings here in the world. We hope you'll continue to join us at Shamayim. There is so much to learn and do together to create a more compassionate world together. Have a great night in Israel and America and wherever you are.